Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I have a very cool synth sound for you once again. What I want to talk about today mainly is combining different sound design techniques as well as choosing the modulation system that you use for your sound. So without further ado, let's get right into that. So here's the sound that we'll be looking at today. This is a digital kind of sound. You can hear that we're getting a pretty dark sound from that, but there are some really cool techniques that make this work. There's some very cool tricks that make this work, and I decided to implement those in MXXX. Mainly because it's very easy to experiment with. You have this whole modular grid setup here that you can use, and all of the parameters and modulators and multi-parameters. Right now the multi-parameters that we're using are just being modulated with random LFOs, so we have a very easy modulation setup. But first I want to talk about the Serum patch. So in the Serum patch, as you can see, we're generating a saw wave and then just using a comb filter on that. And this is being modulated by the note on random 1. Then we give it some stereo width and we remove any of the low frequencies. And that leaves us with a sound like this. So you already get that very resonant and very gritty kind of sound. Now the two sound design techniques that we're implementing here in MXXX is this harmonizer, which is used for pitch shifting. And then we have this ring modulation, which is obviously used for ring modulation. And what you can see is that we just feed one into the other. And then we have two parameters of them, which are being randomly modulated. With this modulation system here, these are the multi-parameters. And these are just set to a minimum and maximum value. And they just become kind of like a macro slider. And obviously these are the macro sliders that you see down here, which are actually being modulated with this random, as I said before. So we have the pitch on the pitch shifter that is being modulated, as well as the frequency on the ring modulation. And you can hear that with this modulation it's very easy to understand what is going on, because you just have kind of like a stepped sequence. Which means that you can sound like this, where you have this 16 note step to it. And you just get individual tones over those 16 notes. Basically in the same way that this comb filter is getting an individual value over this whole 16 notes that it's playing. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to use a different modulation system, and for that I used the modulation system that comes internally with MXXX. So I have this switch which just allows me to turn off these modulators, and then I just turn on these four here, and then we get something like this. You can hear now that there's a certain movement to it, and that comes from the way that this modulation system works. I was trying to actually generate random modulation within this whole system. There is a random modulator here, but I couldn't figure out at the time how it worked. I now know that you need to set it to change on MIDI note, and then you actually need to give it a MIDI input for it to work. I was trying to use these first two, either the smooth modulation or the steps modulation. But there's no way to set it to 16 notes and to synchronize this. So what I decided to do instead is use these normal modulators and then go to the very last shapes, which are either the noise or this mesh shape here. And you can see if you're morphing between it, that you get basically a random modulation at these very highest parts, because you can see how it's moving around and stuff like that. And then we're just applying some smoothing to get from this very strong, very spiky mesh into a little bit of a more smoother modulation. So this one is tied to the pitch of the pitch shifter, and then this one is tied to the frequency of the modulator here. Now this shape is very out of shape, so this should also be roughly here, which means that this one is set up incorrectly. Maybe that reset for some reason, but now it should be okay. And this is the shape that is modulating the shape of the other one. So the way that this works is that this shape is actually being modulated. We have this shape selector here that we're targeting with this different modulator, which is also using this very random shape. I know I'm saying the word shape a lot, but hopefully it's understandable at this point that we're using one modulator to just change the value of the other modulator, so that you basically add a little bit more randomness to that first modulator. Now a cool thing happens if you turn off the arpeggio and you just generate a single note. And you can hear that you're constantly getting the same modulation. Even though we're using this very complex modulation setup, it's all deterministic. So it's not actual randomness. And you can hear how the parameters are moving every time in the same way. I hope that you can hear that even though the tone that we're generating here in Serum is always different, we're always getting the same modulation. I can actually turn off this filter to get a completely stable version of it. And that allows you to hear that it's actually the same sound over and over again. And this is, for example, cool if you want to generate certain effect sounds. So for example, if you just want to create a simple one shot like this. Because we have a little bit of randomness in here, but the rest is deterministic, we get this constant shape that is always the same. What you could do is you could take a recording from that. You use this somewhere in your track. You use this somewhere in your track. And then this one is very, very similar. This one is a little bit different, so we would use, for example, something like this. But you always get the same shape. If you want to change the shape, you can just change it where it is in the playlist. You can hear that we're constantly getting the same modulation shape, but different tones because, again, of that randomness of the comb filter. So hopefully through this video I was able to show you that it's very, very cool to experiment with these essentially very basic techniques that we're using. We're using a comb filter, we're using some pitch shifting, and we're using some ring modulator. And all three just have one parameter that we're modulating either randomly or deterministically. And together with that we can create this whole host of different cool sounds that are all somewhat related in terms of tonality, in terms of sonic qualities and stuff like that. Also, a cool thing is that we can just save this as a preset and come back to it in a different experiment if we're working on something else. Maybe a different kind of synth, maybe a different kind of starting tone that we're using. We can see how this effect that we created, this very basic effect, works on there. We could even choose to save this, for example, with the OTT and the LFOs that modulate this, and just Ctrl-G it into a rack and then save this as an experiment. So now I have this simple rack here that you can just drag and drop into a different sound design session, and then you can start to play around with it. So I hope this video was interesting. I hope I could show you a few cool sound design techniques and how you can mainly combine them and use different modulation systems to get the best out of them. If you did enjoy this video, let me know by leaving a like, and if you're new here and you want to see more of what I do, then make sure to subscribe. But this is going to be it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.